Hello and welcome to the latest A is for Architecture podcast episode. Recorded at the end of last year, Fatina Abreek-Zubiedat spoke to me about her new book, A Territory in Conflict, Eras of Development and Urban Architecture in Gaza, published by the University of Pittsburgh Press last year. The Gaza Strip was formed after the 1948 Arab-Israeli War and served to accommodate fleeing refugees, until 1967 administered by Egypt. Israel's occupation of the region after the Six-Day War saw settlement building and military governance, till in 2005 it withdrew and Hamas took control. But the story of Gaza's form, its spatial and material history, isn't just one of conflict, but really an interplay of competing forces, ideas and identities, a story in which architecture is deeply, sometimes troublingly entangled. Fatina's is an extraordinary book, really, and quite other as a piece of history writing, not dry or dour, nor ambivalent, but also not performative or posturing, rather a sort of archaeology of the present, made more pertinent now that so much of the material history of this strange and embattled place needs making again.
A is for Architecture, a podcast about architecture, buildings, urban culture and space.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the A is for Architecture podcast. I'm delighted today to be talking to Fatina Abreek-Zubiedat, Dr. Fatina Abreek-Zubiedat. Thank you very much for joining me. Fatina, you're all the way from the Middle East. It's early here. It's later where you are, which is good. So it means you're fresh for this. We're going to be talking about your wonderful recent book, A Territory in Conflict, Eras of Development and Urban Architecture in Gaza, which you published this year with the University of Pittsburgh Press. As I said, it's an extraordinary book and a fundamentally political book, which is uncommon for this podcast. So I'm excited and nervous about this because it's a charged topic. But before we get to that, Fatina, as all my guests do, would you be so kind as to introduce yourself?
Okay, first, thanks, Ambrose, for inviting me, for hosting me to this talk, and for talking about my book within its very extraordinary topic. I think it's not extraordinary, but we will talk about this later. So I finished my studies at the Technion, Haifa, my PhD. Then I moved to Etihad, Zurich, where I proceeded with my postdoc studies, and I got my position in Tel Aviv University, and there I established my lab spaces in transition, and I'm a Palestinian architect, and a Palestinian architect who live in Israel, citizen of Israel. I grew up. Oops, sorry.
This can all be cut out, so don't worry.
Okay, sorry. So I grew up for a refugee family. My grandparents and my father are refugees in themselves, internal refugees. They didn't move outside what became Israel after that, the borders. The internal refugees stay next to where they have been living before. And it's like another village. And we grow up on stories on refugeehood, on how to cope with being a refugee, and at the same time a stranger in your homeland, and also how you could be a citizen in some way, because it's not easy to be I don't know if you are familiar with the history, but the Palestinian, it's around 150,000 or between 150,000 to 170,000. They remain in their land. They didn't get out from out of what become the borders of Israel, and they stay on their land. And these communities have to struggle into like two identities, being a Palestinian and being an Israeli citizen. And I'm one of that. So I grow on partition, on fractured identity, on coping with the situation, but also how to thinking in common with the other. And here the other, I'm talking about Jewish. And this is like a very heavy thing you have to cope with. It's not like a normal thing that you are grow in. This is your country, this is your flag, this is your identity, this is your tradition. No, all the time you have to navigate between all these things. So this is how I grew up, and this is how I also came to write what I'm writing on conflict, because I'm like creators of these conflicts, also the political conflicts, also the identity conflicts, and also of being in conflict of myself, to place myself in this region, in the world, and of being also architect, of being woman, and etc. Yeah.
Yes, that's an extraordinary backstory. So, how did you come to decide to study architecture? What drove your impulse?
Ah, I even began my studies in civil engineering in the Technion. And there I'm like searching more. I didn't want all these like calculating all the momentums and how the building is constructed. And so it's like by walking between the faculties, just like I didn't even expose to architecture at that time. When I began my studies, it was on 1999. So I didn't even recognize architecture. Architecture was not among us like a profession, nor as something that we recognize even as a Palestinians in our society where I grew up. So when you have to study, you are like an engineer. You are, and in Arabic, it's like muhandis. So I went through this journey, and I just came out from seeing some of the exhibition around architectural exhibition, and I said, what they are studying, what they are learning? And they said, this is the Faculty of Architecture. So I said, this is what I wanted to make all the time. This is what I'm really love to do. And I applied for the Technion, and applied also for Bezalel in Jerusalem. And I accepted in both places. And I decided to go to Bezalel as it was more for art and academy. And I want to like leaving all these technological things and moving to art and to free my spirit a little bit. And there I started to ask the main question about how to also learn architecture without like in the Middle East and in Israel. And all the time I was really attractive to what we called it like informal architecture, or architecture in small a, like the everyday architecture, slums, poverty neighborhoods, also the dead city in Cairo, and camps. I started to ask about refugee camps. And there and also the Bedouin people who all the time on the move. These the question and the projects that I dealt with during my studied in the during the bachelor. And when I finished, I know that I want research also, but I also didn't leave my practice. I co-founded with my partner in an office of architecture, and we practice architecture in terms of really design of buildings, of master plans.
What's your practice's name?
Is Zubiedat architects.
Okay.
But all the time I was very attracted. I want to ask questions. I want to know more. I want to situate my practice within research, within more fundamental questions. And this is how I said, okay, I will begin to like I can't say shift, but more like integrating my practice with research. And the first sites I decided to proceed with the master, and I awarded Israeli scholarship. It was very competitive, and it was on the topic of refugee camps on the West Bank, mainly the refugee camp in the West Banks. And I started in 2007 to conduct this research. So in Israeli institution, when I started to do my research in the Technion, it was not like acceptable topic. Architecture was more of at that time on morphology, on asking about maybe Israeli architects and Israeli architecture, and not on camps. Like refugee camps is not architecture. It's beyond the discipline itself. So I said, and what these places that like caught up large territories of the world, how you can like ignore this kind of architecture? Why architecture is like good, beautiful buildings, aesthetic in what you said, and the morphology you are talking about. But these morphologies cannot be isolated from the people who made these morphologies, from the people who made this technology, from the way that people experience architecture. And what is architecture? For me, it's a part, and it's situated within the cultural discipline. So you cannot ignore what people are doing, how they're living, and what the other doing for them. And power for me was like a central question to start studying these like what they called it the non-architecture spaces. And I was very stubborn to continue with studying refugee camps. And during my visits to Dheisheh, Fawar, and other refugee camp in the West Bank, and talking with the people, I felt all the time that like there is a West Bank and there is a Gaza, Dafi and Gaza. And all the time people like talking about this separate territories. And when I asked about what about the camps on Gaza Strip, and they said, no, it's another story. Why it's another story? No, it's a more complicated story. It's more complex. Leave it alone. So I started okay. I said I will finish my dissertation, my master dissertation, and then I will move to explore the curiosity to explore what is Gaza, what is Gaza, what is the Gaza Strip is about, why they are not talking about it. And this is how I arrived to my PhD. And during my PhD, the first question is, or the first attempt was to making a survey, what is written about Gaza. And I was really shocked because all the books, they're writing about the territory, Palestinian occupied territories. But when you are digging inside the literature itself, there is all the time West Bank. And Gaza is the place that all the time is ignored, is on the margins, no one talking really about it. The only book that mentioned or started to engage with the Gaza Strip was Eyal Weizman and his book on Holy Land. And even when I read this book, I explored that it's not about the Gaza Strip itself, it's about the military, it's about the architects as a militant in themselves, it's about the occupation and the settlers, but not about the Gaza. I didn't even understand what is Gaza is about, how it was born, why the refugees in the West Bank say that it's different from them, why they are not the same camps if we are talking about the same regimes, about the same agencies that built these camps, about the same humanitarian crisis, why the camps are so different, why people are talking about these spaces in different. And this is how I got to or started to explore the Gaza Strip. And I said, this is the topic will be of my PhD, and the long journey that I went through for 5, 6 years just in my PhD, and after that with a postdoc until I wrote the book itself.
It brings up so many interesting topics, particularly around informal architecture, which I'm fascinated by. And I've done podcasts previously with specialists in informal architecture, Kim Dovey, Tanzil Shafiq, Pablo Meninato, Teddy Cruz von Foreman. So I've certainly looked at that, and it's always been something that's fascinated me and frustrated me. This idea that informality doesn't justify the same historiography, the same techniques, the same attention as does famous architecture by famous people. I guess what we might call intentional design, but that's also incorrect.
Yeah, but here also I think it's like not with the time I rejected even the perception of the refugee camps as informal, because when I studied this in deeply, it's not in an informal architecture. The people after that, how they use the space in informality way, but the way that the camps, the refugee camps in Gaza and in Dafa, in the West Bank and in Gaza, how they designed and how they were engineered, they are very formal. They are very colonial sites, and this is with very like formal architecture, but it's outside the boundaries of the discipline of how to approach these spaces. So if you approach them, you can approach them like informal architecture. But I think it's not informal, it's very formal. It's embedded in the perception of architects, of engineers, because all these camps were designed by architects. They were even thought the relation between refugees and humanitarian agencies and the states. This is like invention of architects. It's not like people build these places, even in there are like under violence in some way, but they are imposed and enforced to live in these spaces. And this is how the refugee camps were developed, by enforcement. It's not like you choose to be. It's not like a good space to be. This is also one of my maybe critics about all the boundaries between cities and camps. All the time there are people now talking about how the camp become a city, and they want to open our thoughts about being like an urban and related to camps as a cities. But I think it's not, because the experience, you are, even when you experience, you are not free. You are still not a citizen. You are still imposed under humanitarian agencies. And it is not like a good way to live and to raise your other generation. And the camp is a camp, and it will not be a city. You can make things, you can change things, you can undermine its boundaries, but still it's camp. And all the time you will treat it as a refugee. And this is a different story, I think, from informality.
So you're saying it's essentially a new typology of urban space that is distinct in Palestine, distinct in the Middle East, and therefore requires new techniques of analysis.
It's not a new typology. It's from the imperial British, and even the camps will exist from longer time. But the way that the camp were managed, the way that how they treated, and the main target of the camps is distinctive. Yes, it's in morphology, in its design, in its proportion. It's like similar. It's aesthetic. It's the same, and you can like just compare between different camps in Africa, in all over the history, even in the Far East and in the Middle East, in different, you can see the same morphology, the same typology, the same guidelines that direct these architects, and the knowledge that transformed from one regime to another regime, from one colonial to another neo-colonial regime or states. But the way that the Palestinian refugee camps were built and the way they were managed and who were responsible for them, it's another history. It's another story. Because first of all, you can think that all the camps are managed under the UNHCR agency. All the camps of the world. This is only the Palestinian camps are under UNRWA. And this is like you can see that the agency that managed and administered the Palestinian refugees, it was like a temporary agency under a very unique circumstances where Israel building the nation state, its nation state in 1948, and the Palestinian were not getting a state. So they are refugees with no state, because in other places, think about Syrian refugees or Southern African refugees, they have a state. They like move between states, but they become non-citizen in their other state, but they have like a borders and a state that were had to enforce to leave. But in the Palestinian state, until today, there is no Palestine state, and refugee camps they have to return to where? To return to their homes. Their homes now is Israel. So it's more complicated, and the agencies and the way they are very charged in political terms. But when I started also to explore these refugee camps, I understand that they cannot be divided with our understanding the Gaza Strip as a whole, and the way that politics and class formation inside the Gaza Strip were designed and engineered between the local Gazans themselves who lived there and between the Palestinian who supposed to be hosted under the first in the Egyptian administration and after that under the direct of Israeli occupation. And there are like two regimes that they have to experience their refuge in this after 48.
So this brings up a lot of questions. I'm interested in, for example, your method of engagement and analysis, and maybe we can come on to that. But I thought perhaps, to go back to the motivations behind the book, you use this phrase in the introduction where you talk of the dispossession of Gaza's urban histories. Is the intention of this book in a way to create a recognition of a distinct spatial history as a means of, I suppose, empowerment, for want of a more subtle word?
You see, my effort, first of all, is to recognize Gaza Strip as a concrete, real space, villages, town, real people, because all the time when you say Gaza Strip, I grow with this perception. Gaza Strip is the margin. It's like you don't know anything about Gaza Strip. And the first image that it's like a fire, it's terrorism, it's like Hamas, it's like violence, it's like occupation, military, and it's like the siege place that no one could imagine beyond its borders. The media is full of these images about the explosion, about the destruction, about the misery of the Gaza Strip. This is the images that we get all the time about Gaza. It's not true. It's not wrong. It's true. There is a destruction all the time. There is an occupation all the time. In some way, it's like not all the time. It's like direct occupation. For example, what happened in West Bank, it's like a siege, and Israel is controlling from security manner. But it's another kind of occupation. But in some way, this is the images that you got from when I said Gaza Strip, and also in the theory and the theoretical studies and the architectural books that I went through to really understand what is Gaza is, and the same. It's like the abstract space that everyone could occupy, everyone could humiliate, everyone could treating as like a misery space. And I refused this. I rejected this. And especially, I didn't expect that my book will be like a kind of archive, unfortunately, in itself, because Gaza now is totally destroyed and in the rubble. And I didn't, when I started my journey, I want to put Gaza on the map of real space, of people who are living like other people in the world. They have their freedom, inside freedom, spirit, they have their dreams, they have their inspiration, and they want just their political freedom. They want to be a free people and to live there. And but I didn't expect at all that my book will turn like an archive in itself. I searched long, almost 4 years. I was desperate of finding materials to write this history. There was now it's more like some of the archives were opened, mainly of Israeli archive. But when I started my research, there's no archive on the Gaza Strip. I want to learn to study the Gaza Strip under the Israeli occupation. All the archives that I went through were closed for the public, were not accessible. And when I contacted the Palestinian Authority, the same. They said, no, it's not forbidden. And under the Hamas, it was like it's forbidden to get the archive, and it was also forbidden. And I said, how I could learn what is Gaza Strip, how it was developed. I don't want to continue the history of like writing on misery, writing on destruction. I want architecture. Architecture is hope, is like to build for the future. And something happened there. How this territory is like putting there, how it was developed. This is the question that all the time. And I said, okay, I will not quit. I will continue until I found like sources. And I said, okay, if we are talking about architecture and the architecture rule in the production of knowledge and the architecture way of making things happen, of materializing these politics, then I will start with architects themselves. I will go and ask, who's the architects? And I have no clue. Just I asked the refugees in the West Bank, do you remember from your relatives in some way name of architect that work there, or even any one who built there, just to start? And they said, no, but you can ask who was the Ministry of Defense, Shimon Peres. I said, Shimon Peres, I have to ask. And said, yeah, he know everyone. He was the Ministry of Defense in that period that you are asking, around the 70s. And he very familiar with most of the names that worked. And I said, why Shimon Peres? Okay, Minister of Defense, but what? Why he is interesting, will be interesting at all in architecture? And I started to contact. I sent email. I was like a knave. I said, I need an appointment with Shimon Peres. He was, after his presidency, like managing the Peace Center in Tel Aviv. And they said, no, you are asking, Shimon Peres it's difficult to meet him. And I said, no, I have to. I'm doing my PhD. I have to. I need it. I need to talk to him. This is like, otherwise, I will not be like, I will not get my PhD. And a ton of emails I sent to Shimon Peres, and he accepted to meet me. And I went there. And here I I'm doing something. Here is the power of being also Israeli citizen and Palestinian. You can have the relation also with the Israelis. And also I have a lot of Jewish colleagues that I'm working with inside the university. And we are also working together for justice and issues of freedom of Palestine. But this is like you have a privilege here that you can also contact people who control, direct control the Gaza Strip. And he said, okay, he gave me sort of names of architects and the way they, and he tell a lot of stories about his engagement, how much he loved architecture. He was fond of architecture, and he loved a lot Herzog de Meuron architecture and followed Foster Norman architecture. And he told me a lot of stories about architecture and its beauty. And he said, why you will engage with this architecture that it's not beautiful? It's not aesthetic at all. You are like, I was, I get all the excellency in my studies. You are like having a good platform to start in building your cities, your villages in a different way. You are talented in architecture. And I said, no, but this is also architecture. And they said, okay, good luck. And from the names he provided me, I started to contact the architects. And from one architect to other architect who I interviewed around 35 architects, and from Israel and abroad, because very quickly I noticed that not only Israel are the most who build the Gaza Strip between 70s until Oslo Accord in 1993, they were Israeli architects, but they collaborated with British architects, with Southern African architects, and also with the planners and engineers and architects from Palestine, and that like in a huge network of building the Gaza Strip. And this was fascinating for me, and then how to get materials. So really the architects were very generous in some way. Almost every architect that I interviewed, and he like preserved or kept on the some of the drawings and the plans. He was very like, yes, go ahead and write this history. It's important. Also, it's important for us, and it's important for the history itself. And this is how all these things happened. And the main materials I got from architects. But after that, I started also to like make relation with some of the archivists in the state archive, and she provided me with some files, and now it's open to the public, but at that time it was like forbidden, to not accessible. And this is how I just start to build the story and to understand what is the Gaza Strip and the relation inside the Gaza Strip.
Fascinating. It's amazing. It's an amazing story. And I'm very interested that both the British and the South Africans were involved in this, but also somewhat unsurprised. The British have their fingers everywhere.
Mhm.
If there's a pie, we'll have a finger in it.
Yeah.
What was the intention, as you understand it, behind this? Because the association, as you said, Shimon Peres, Ministry of Defense, and then the design of Gaza, the implication is that there was a militarized vision for this. Was it something as simple as the military are really good at building refugee settlements very quickly? Or am I to read into this that the intention of the design was to create essentially carceral urban space to control Palestinian Gazan populations?
It's more complicated. When Shimon Peres was like a Minister of Defense, there were two agendas inside the Israeli ministry, and when they have to, one that promoted with economic plans, and the other were held in settler colonial perceptions. One were influenced from the Chicago University and the term of you can't control people without physically control them. It's like by economically making the situation dependency between people and integrating and getting the macroeconomy through microeconomic projects. And this is what Shimon Peres was very want to proceed with that. And the other way, it was settler colonialism. You have to settle and physically occupy this territory, displace the people, and not emplace them, because in the first, during the perceptions of economy, how you control through economic development, there was you will leave people in their homes, Gazans and Palestinians and refugees themselves, but you will develop the way that they are living, you modernize their neighborhoods. And like you have to damage and erase all these camps, because refugees have to feel that there's no other place they have to return to. They have to forget their home and they have to stay. And if you want to keep people in their land and their new land, they called it new home, new land in this perception, then you have to empower architecture. Architecture has an agency in itself to build these homes, to make these feelings. And the other team, the settler colonial team, said, no, refugees will pose a threat for Israel, and Gaza in itself will pose a threat for Israel after that. Then we have to displace all the people and force them to be outside the Gaza, to live in El Arish, in Sinai, and we have to build our Jewish settlements inside the Gaza. And then it was like a fierce debate inside the government, and the government and the one who decided at that time were professors from different universities, from Weizmann universities, were the advisors of the ministry as well, from Hebrew University, from the Technion themselves, and they advised to adopt the economic development master plan. And this is the way that all these issues began. Like, you will not displace people, you will upgrade their status, because refugees were totally isolated and separated from the Gazans themselves, from the local Gazans. The local Gazans were under the direct managed before under the Egyptian administration, and after that under Israeli government. And the refugees were under the humanitarian agency UNRWA, under the administration of UNRWA itself. And Israel didn't want this situation to be separated. They said refugees will be as locals, and there will be one government that will control both of these people. Israel, the one who will be now the lord of this territory. And we have to also to get off UNRWA, and because UNRWA, until UNRWA will continue to hold all this aid and humanitarian staff, then the refugees will all the time remember that they are refugees. And we have to make them forget that they are refugees and make Gaza the new home for them. And this is the whole story that began on that, how to build a home. And then there have to be architects who can imagine the future and to design for the future for building home. And for Shimon Peres, it was why people will continue to live in these misery things. We can upgrade their status, and they could be like a third class citizens in that they are belong to poor people in the world. They are at all peasants. They have to be dependent on the economy of Israel, and we can benefit. Israel can benefit from the cheap labor of these people, because they know how to build. They know the soil. They know the water. They know the region. They are from the region, and we can benefit from their skills. And also, Shimon Peres, for example, was very important for him that he meet that they have to build a city for Jewish people, like a border that called Yamit in the southern border of the Gaza Strip. And he said Yamit is the future because Jewish settler will like build a border through city for Jewish city. It will be divided between Egypt and the Gaza Strip. And also we could prevent any option that Gaza as a city will develop a port because we will make Yamit as the main port city. And then if you like empower the economy in for the Jewish people and Gazans and refugees started to work inside Yamit itself and they go just to sleep in these more beautiful more aesthetic places, then everything will be fine. And this is all the whole project what proceeded with. And it was like experimental lab for architects. They like cut the territory for clusters from the north, the center, and the south. And each cluster denominated some staff of architects, some teams of architects. These three offices will build the north of Gaza. All the Bet Lahia, Jabalia, Bet Hanun, all this, and the Gaza city, and also Nusrat and Librej in the center almost will be managed by other offices, and the south. Khan Yunis and Rafah and all the refugees camps around these cities will be built through other architects and will be designed through our architects. So architecture is deeply involved in these politics, not outside these politics. You cannot like, and this is why it's like, Gaza is apolitical. No, it's built by architects. It's political in some way because there is a conflict, there is a colonization, there is a war, and everything. It's like Sudan now is under a war, and it's also political. But that's not architects. But architects have to engage with this question. Cannot be for me as a one who grew up in this region in Palestine and grow up inside Israel and in the Middle East conflict. I cannot ignore what is Gaza or other places is about, and they cannot be separated from the politics themselves. Also formal politics and the politics of the discipline itself, because architects also they are taught and experience architecture from different ways. You study for. You are not studied when you finish your studies. You will not like design a refugee camp. You study to design buildings, you study to design in your neighborhoods, then you are not professionalized in studying camps or even in designing camps, and you should not design camps. You should design for better world, not for misery world. And then the question, how camps continue to exist and live, and how architecture is part of this. This is a very difficult question also for the discipline. So also architects not all have to deal with the formal politics or geopolitics, but they have also to deal with the politics of the discipline itself, of the tools of the architecture itself, how they could manage these spaces and what their ethical question about these spaces. So it's not like outside the discipline and the responsibility of the architects to ask this difficult question. And this is main for me. This is really, and this is why I say a territory in conflict, because not only the territory is in conflict, but also the discipline itself in conflict when it gets to these spaces.
Yes, I think that's a really important and interesting point. And it strikes me that it comes down to a question of a meaningful understanding of what power in architecture is. And I teach a lecture and deal with lots of kind of students writing about this notion of power. And I think that the kind of idea that power is a zero-sum game, that if I have power, you don't have power, is the only form of architecture. And power really is about the person that holds the knife rather than the victim. And I think what you're describing is what Bachrach and Barak called a two-dimensional power. All of these other forms of manipulation, I think they had 5 categories, didn't they? Coercion, influence, authority, force, and manipulation. And I think architecture operates in that space, but it can operate in that three-dimensional way. The Hannah Arendt's idea or Stephen Luke's idea around a relational form of power in which power is an emergent quality of human association, which seems to me to be what you're describing emerges in Gaza prior to the devastation, the recent devastation, that even in the context of this militarized humanitarian architecture, Palestinian people were able to construct meaningful, embedded, associative architectures.
First, let's turn to the power is embedded in the built environment and in the unbuilt environment.
Yeah.
It's inside the buildings, the discourse, the representation, the plans, and everything. Power is there, rests there. And then exploring the power, you have to, for me, it was to bring different voices, several agencies to understand this power. And this is the first issue was for me, and this took for me a lot of time to find Palestinians, Gazans themselves, to speak about what they plan, how they engage in planning Gaza, how they collaborated with Israelis, architects, under direct occupation, we said in the 70s and 80s, before the disengagement after Oslo. So for Palestine, it was also difficult to say that they were collaborated. And for them, it was also difficult to work with Israelis. And in some way, when you talk to them, you can feel that these architects or planners or engineers from whom I talk, they also have a different meaning about what is Israel and what is power and how they could design their neighborhood, their homes, and what refugees for them were meant. And then there is no, we are all human, that we have in different perceptions, ideologies, and we are not the same. And also the Palestinian is the same. They are also not a monolithic subject. They have another perceptions about what is Gaza for them, and what refugee has to be, what is right and what's not right. And if we understand that power is also not the top-down power, but also the bottom-up power and the power of the people and even the elite themselves or the refugees themselves inside Gaza and all the contested arenas that were developed between and among the Palestinians themselves, then all the way that we understand architecture and who design architecture and who is responsible and what is occupation is taking a different story. And I do believe in the power of the Palestinians themselves in building their state, but they have to be free first. They have to be free people, first of all. They have to manage their aspiration and not to be controlled by other agencies or by other governments or by Israel. They have to get their freedom to decide about their destiny.
But they have to get their freedom to decide about the location of their bodies. And I think that's where architecture plays a role. But it's also, to me, where there are very strong parallels here, obviously between apartheid South Africa, but also towards the British colonial project and also the internal logic of colonialism as it played out on British working classes, who likewise, and I'm not trying to make a clumsy parallel here, but like in the early 20th century, the British working classes were entirely subject to the whims of commercial and state power, or commercial state power as really a singular hydra, a singular thing with many heads. So I think that's a really key aspect, is that the way that architecture and urban design performs, as you describe it in Gaza, seems to be predominantly about controlling, or significantly about controlling, the location of bodies.
This is interesting. Continue, please.
And I was really interested in this point that I picked up from the book. The way that you do that is through either this militarized, essentially modernist form of planning, which is disembodying, alienating, abstracting, and so no one feels at home, or the other side of it, which is, as I put in my notes to you, a sort of critical regionalism where you try and embed people through a pastiche or a borrowing of local norms and customs. But in both cases, you're fundamentally trying to tie people to a space so that their body is locked down. Does that make sense?
Yeah. But what is different between when you talk about regional modernism, regional architecture, or critical regionalism? We are talking here about a Cold War era when I wrote the framework of the book. And in the Cold War era, all the colonized people were decolonized or in the process of decolonization. And the only people who continued to be under direct colonization and they didn't get a state of themselves is the Palestinian people in all the world. And this is like, here comes also the settler colonialism, because what is different and normally different is when architects, also Israeli architects and other architects, adapted or appropriate different forms and typologies, architectural typologies from other places in site. For example, in the book itself, I talked about sites and service in Latin America and about the shelters that they adopted from South Africa and the growing house and the perception of you build your home from and the Mediterranean perception on how to be in the Mediterranean. So they like adapt the form, the typology, but they didn't ask about the status of the people, because we are talking about the Cold War where all the nation who experienced regionalism were under decolonization, or were like a nation state, decolonized nation state. They were have a state. And here you are experience social and regional architecture within people that they are colonized, they are under direct occupation. And this is like a new meaning of architecture. And when I talked about militarized urbanism, I talked here about the clash between these perceptions of Mediterraneanism, of site and service models that were all in the global south, we can say, in this period, and tropical architecture that also engage in Africa mainly. And you adapt these perceptions of how to make people feel that they are part of the region, that this is their home. And when they are like when coming to Palestine, there's no state, there's no, they are not, you are doing architecture and you are getting like a hope and design for the future when the future is under occupation. And you have no like any space even to think. When architects were work, no discussion was about how to free the people themselves. It's all how to make them feel better, but not how to make them free and real free. So and this is, like I said, Gaza and also Palestine is distinct in that way, that the same architecture that worked in other places was for promoted for people who get their nation state and they have to build now their nation. And in Palestine, it faces the people when they are under control and under like the colonial and post-colonial here, very entangled. And when I adapted my methodology on post-colonialism, I mean post-colonialism as a methodology, not as an era or like colonialism ended and now we are talking about post-colonialism, but post-colonialism as a methodology in itself, that it brings many agencies and many voices to understand Gaza. So you are like moving models, architectural models, and building forms and that experience in Algeria and Latin America and other spaces, and put it inside, and for people that they are waiting for their return, or they have to achieve their freedom, and this is like some kind of what architects are blind from the situation, or they are like going, okay, we will do the minimum. I didn't understand this until this day. What is really and how architects could design, Jewish architects or other architects or British architects or whatever, could design for people that they are under occupation and under colonization. And this is the question that really I coped inside the book and inside understanding the influences and the movement of knowledge and how this knowledge come with you are continue under the coloniality of the colonialism itself. And militarized urbanism, this is the clash between the architects who defend themselves. They have like they come from cultural perceptions and they want for betterment of the refugees or the Gazans themselves, but they clash with the military itself that they want the architecture to have like a security manner. They have to secure, first of all, the Israelis and the Israeli citizens themselves. So, for example, when architects design, they have to cope with density on their camps. And they decided to build new homes for 5 to 6 floors. And they said, okay, in order to make public spaces and to put greenery spaces, we have to raise the buildings for 6 floors or until 7 even. And when the military and because under occupation the architects work directly with the military administration. And the military said, no, you cannot do like that. The maximum you can get is 3 floors. And they said, no, we cannot overcome this density if we are like putting the 3 floors. And they said, no, you cannot, because we cannot observe what's happening inside the camp, because they stood like they have a stance of Zeppelin, that all the time aerial viewing of the camps and the movement of the Palestinians themselves, and they didn't want to limit the way the military will control what's happening inside the camp. So here, like you have another intentions and another perceptions of architects that clash with what security and military aspects have to do, and this is what I call militarized urbanism, because this urbanism is work under condition of military and security manners.
I want to finish on one last question, which is, of course, since a form of peace has been brokered between Israel and Gaza, and it's strange, isn't it, to think of a country having a civil war but not thinking of it as a civil war. Since peace has been brokered and a reconstruction plan has been put forward, I guess my question is, what does your book perhaps suggest might be an ideal for what happens now in the reconstruction of Gaza? That's a big question.
No, yeah, but it's important. First, I think the book itself, it's like, again, I didn't expect to be like a documentary history. It was more like a history that have to be in its own right, but now it's like sort of archive in itself, unfortunately. There's almost the camps and the cities in Gaza totally destroyed. You have a toxic environment. You have a contamination in water and everything. No infrastructures, starvation. And it's not like the years that I talked about, because when you have a development, you have also a dynamic. It's doing development. You have agencies. And this moved after Oslo to just a security manner. And Gaza, when Hamas get controlled, it was like a siege territory under Hamas government, and Israel permitted totally for entering any lot of materials inside Gaza. So under this situation, it was like expected to all this matter will be exploded in some way, because people want to live. And the war came when Gaza already for Israel is just a security manner. You can just have to defend your state in some way. And here architecture is, I still believe that architecture has tools. It cannot solve political situation, and it cannot really shifted the geopolitical situation. But architecture has tools and power also to think beyond these borders and to delineate the way that we are approach first of all this territory. So in somewhat the book is telling the history of rehabilitation and development that happened until Oslo, and now it will be like a source that everyone will get to know how Gaza was, how it was built, and then what kind of discourses of rehabilitation was exist in order or to continue this project or to learn from the wrongs. I don't know how it will meet the architects who will design Gaza, but in somewhere I'm just like also now I'm focusing on Wadi Ghazi, Gaza Valley, that it's still a valley originally connected between the Mediterranean and the western part of Gaza until it gets to the Negev region inside Israel and to the West Bank. It's all like connected all this area. So it's like a kind of a new imagination of architects and architecture, how to build this common space, how to live through this valley. And I'm searching about the dynamic histories of the valley itself, but it's more than a larger project that now in my lab we are developing on food insecurity at all. But so for your question, yes, there is some hope for building peace, at least not the peace, political peace, but in its formation, but peace among people themselves. Piece of how to live in common in building a better place. We have to admit that it will not be like justice if until Palestine will get its independence and Palestinian people get freedom. So but at least we can engage in the discussion how to promote this in new ways, at least in documenting the history itself and in register the history itself, that history could be continue to be live inside the Palestinian people and other people. And this is important for me, how to document, how to save what is already damaged, and how to work against erasure, also cultural erasure. And this is very crucial for me. And the book is one step for bigger efforts that had to be done. And now it's all, all the universities, all the archives are under the rubble. So it's like a huge now responsibility for architects also to document, to engage, before they engage in how to build, how to preserve, and how to save what is remained, and try to make new perceptions of how living in Gaza. And I say Gaza because I'm treating Gaza as a region and not the Gaza Strip as the artificial geopolitical entity with borders, but Gaza as a region, Gaza as a people who have deserved to live in dignity.
Fabulous. What a wonderful, wonderful way to finish. Truly extraordinary. Thank you so very much, Fatina. It's been amazing to hear you talk.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
As Beyoncé put it, got motivation, I done found me a new foundation. I'm taking my new salvation, and I'ma build my own foundation. Oh baby, baby. You get it, Queen Bey. Thanks to Fatina for taking the call, and to Leslie Rains at the University of Pittsburgh Press for sending me the book. Links to the book and to Fatina are in the podcast description, obviously, so follow them, make contact, buy the book. And thanks for listening.